Okay, welcome everyone. And today the topic is two great Jewish women. Two names from Jewish history that I'm sure all of you have heard. We're going to actually make a comparison, a connection. That's not my connection. It's made not just in terms of a familial connection between these two great Jewish women, but also in terms of a continued mission, one to the other. And of course, we're talking about the great Jewish mother, Sarah Imenu. Sarah, the wife of Abraham, whose birth name was Sarai, and yet the Yud was removed because Sarai was a personal greatness and a Hey was given to her. Hey was given to her because her greatness during her life ended up spreading throughout the world and right through Jewish and world history. So that's going to be our discussion today, the great Sarah. And we're going to see that one of the greatest scholars of Jewish history makes a fascinating historical leap between Sarah and her great granddaughter, whose name was Esther. That wasn't her real name. Her real name was Hadassah, actually, according to most opinions. Actually, it's written in the Megillah. They see that was her real name. Some say maybe Esther was her real name, Hadassah wasn't, but most agree her real name was Hadassah, and she was named Esther. Let's talk about these two incredibly important Jewish women. Without both of them, we would not be here today. Sarah, the first ever Jewish mother, without her, we would not exist spiritually. And Esther, her great-granddaughter, without her, we wouldn't be alive physically today. Because at the time of the Purim story, she saved all the Jewish people's lives. When I say all, I mean all the Jewish people, man, woman, and child, who are alive today, thanks to Esther and to Sarah. And these two people, whose level of prophecy, there were 7 Jewish prophetesses, and these are 2 of them. And we know that the prophecy, the spiritual connection that Sarah had was greater, says Rashi and the commentators, than her husband Abraham. She is what created the Jewish people. It was her efforts that built her Jewish home. And my friends, if you feel spiritual and connected today, I don't know who you are or where you're watching from, Instagram, Facebook, Zoom, it's because of your great-great-grandmother, Sarah. Let's talk about these 2 amazing Jewish women. And let's find out who the person was who makes this fascinating connection between these 2 queens of the Jewish people. Because that's what Sarah means. She was a queen, a princess over the entire world of her day. And Esther also was a queen over 120 provinces in her day. But let's talk about Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, the greatest rabbi of his day, whose teachings we follow and we read about in the Talmud, in the Gemara. He lived at the end of the Second Temple period, one of the greatest Kabbalists, actually, of world history. The Gemara tells us that he used to walk into an orchard with his colleagues, and his colleagues went through challenge and difficulty. They died in the orchard, but he left the orchard perfect. Why? Because Rabbi Akiva, the orchard represents the deepest levels of Torah understanding of Rabbi Akiva. And he could even look at the letters and the crowns of the letters in the Torah and darshan, understand great secrets about the Torah, about the world, humans, and of course God and the spiritual realm. That's who we're talking about over here. We're talking about Rabbi Akiva. We're talking about Rabbi Akiva, my friends, who when Moses somehow was transported hundreds of years into the class of Rabbi Akiva. And while he was sitting in this class, it used to be that the first row were the best students. and the second row were the second best students, and the third row were the third best students. And Rabbi Akiva gave this class to hundreds of students. He actually had tens of thousands of them. And when Moshe Rabbeinu was transported, somehow he has some time travel ability, we're not too sure how. That's what the Gemara tells us. He didn't end up in the front row, second, third, he ended up pretty far back. And Moses was actually very upset. He thought, wow, I'm Moses, the giver of the Torah. And I'm sitting in the class of Rabbi Akiva, my great-great-great, and here he is, and I'm not even his best student. And then Rabbi Akiva said, everything I'm telling you comes from Moses and Sinai, and that calmed down Moshe Rabbeinu. That's how great Rabbi Akiva was. One day Rabbi Akiva was giving a class, and he saw that his students were sleeping. They were falling asleep, which, to be honest with you, makes me feel a little bit better, because if Rabbi Akiva, the greatest Kabbalist and rabbi of Jewish history, has people sleeping in his class, I shouldn't feel so bad. Any rabbi shouldn't feel so bad that people are sleeping in their class. Anyway, as the story goes, Rabbi Akiva is in his class, students falling asleep, and he bangs the table. And he says, let me ask you a question. In what merit did Queen Esther get to rule over 127 provinces? We know that Esther married Achashverosh. She was taken till Akach against her will. And we know from the Megillat Esther, that Achashverosh ruled over 127 provinces, lands, all the way from Hodu at Kush, from India to Ethiopia, a vast amount of land. When Esther married him, she became the royal queen and controller of those areas of land as well. So Rabbi Akiva asked the student, in what merit did Queen Esther get to rule over all of these lands? And he says, and his students were like, what's he talking about? We're having a discussion, learning some Torah, and suddenly he asks this question about Queen Esther and all of these lands. And he says, I'm going to tell you. Because Esther had a great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother. And her name was Sarah. And Sarah died at 127 years old. And when she died, we are told that all of her years came before God, Chai Sarah, perfect. She divided her life into three groupings. The Torah does. It says she died at the age of 100, and she died at the age of 20, and the age of 7. Why not just tell us she died when she was 127? And the rabbis tell us, because just like a child is clean of sin at the age of 7 years old, so too is she at 20 and even at 127. And just like a person loses their koach and their power when they reach old age, she, Sarah, the queen of the Jewish people, the founder, our principal matriarch, she was so incredible that at the age of 127, right to the last moment, she was giving and she was powerful, just like a young woman of 20 years old. Everything about her, every year of her life was used well. She did not waste a single moment of time. Everything was good. Everything was perfect. And she finished her life as though she started it. Clean, perfect, and ready to move on to the next world. Says Rabbi Akiva, that's Sarah. What is the connection between Sarah and her living to 127 years and her great-great-great-granddaughter Esther ruling over 127 provinces? Besides the same number, how are these two people connected? And the rabbis tell us something very, very amazing and important, my friends. Says the Sfas Emet, let me tell you something. We learn the power of time. Says the Sfas Emet, if every person treated every year with the same importance that they treat an entire country, if they treat every month like they would a city, if we treat every day like it's a town, every minute like it's a community, our lives would be invariably greater. We live in two realms if we're in this world, and we cannot escape. We live in time and space. And my friends, Sarah was the queen of time. So the Torah details how long she lived and divides it up. She had full control over Zman. Zman, the word Zman means time. Actually, the same word Zman also means Zimun. Zimun means to prepare. She prepared every single moment and she didn't waste a minute of it. Right? We have this expression, killing time. We all do it. I do it, you do it. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein used to say, it's a very good expression, killing time. Because when you waste it, that is mamash ritzicha. That is murder. Killing time is the worst thing. You can get back money, you can get back things, you can't get back time. We all have work to do in this area, and Sarah was the queen of time. And in the merit of Sarah, listen very carefully, in the merit of Sarah, her great-great-great-great-granddaughter, Esther, became the queen of space, of makom, of land. She ended up ruling over a vast amount of land. And you know what? That land that she became the powerful owner and controller of ended up saving all the Jewish people when Haman and Achashverosh came to wipe them all out. It was the power of Esther and her control, her royal control over herself and over all this land that ended up saving the Jewish people. If you watching this are well and healthy today and identify as a Jew, let me be very, very clear with you. It's only in the merit of Sarah, the matriarch of the Jewish people, who gave us our spiritual life, and Esther, Queen Esther, who saved all the Jewish people throughout the world, wherever they were at that time, that we owe her our physical life. These two holy, great Jewish women became the queens of time and space, and without both of them, we would not be here today. And each one of them were dependent on each other. Sarah needed Esther to continue her life and her mission, and Esther wouldn't have turned up without her great-great-grandmother, Sarah. We learn from this, my friends, two such important ideas. First of all, the actions of one person can have ramifications, not just for the people around them, not just for their immediate family, not even for their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, but for their great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren, centuries, millennia later. You do some act right now, you don't know the power of that one simple act for generations to come. And you probably won't live to see most of the repercussions of the actions that you take. I'm going to take a guess. I may be wrong, but I'm usually right. Everyone watching today, if you identify as a Jew, I'm pretty sure that going back at least 4 generations, maybe not your parents, maybe not your grandparents, but definitely your great-grandparents were committed, Torah observant, to some degree at least, Jews. And your great-grandmother lit Friday night candles. A beautiful and important mitzvah we're going to learn from Sarah as well. Hold on. And when she lit those candles, wherever she was, whether she was in Poland or Russia or Persia, Iraq, Syria, makes no difference. At some point, I know that she shed tears. And those tears came for her family, her friends, but they're affecting you. And she says, please, don't just let me light these candles. Please make sure, God, that my children, grandchildren, and my great-great-grandchildren who won't even know my name. How many of you know the names of your great-grandparents? Maybe you do. I barely do. I think I have 1 or 2 in my head. But the great-great-grandparents, forget about that. Strangers. Back in the old country. Those tears that they shed in prayer when they lit those Friday night candles, those tears have rolled through history and time to another location, another place, to their descendants, of which you here are one of them. There is this generational, spiritual relocation of effort that moves forward and forward and forward as a megalgal and travels and spins and turns. So we learn that we can affect the future, but we also learn from Sarah and Esther that we are affected by the past. And who we are today, we all feel good about ourselves. Here we are, sitting in a Torah class. Maybe you go to Torah classes, maybe you've been on trips to Israel, you feel spiritual, and you went to yeshiva or Jewish day school, or you're giving up the evenings to learn Torah, and you feel good about yourself, and you should feel good about yourself. But I promise you, much of that merit is not yours. You didn't earn it. It came from your great-great-great-grandparents. And it came from their parents, and their parents, all the way back to Esther, and all the way back to Sarah, without whom we would not be here today. Let's double click for a moment on Sarah. You know, it's interesting, the parasha that describes Sarah's death is called the life of Sarah. I'll say that again. The Torah portion, which happens to be this week's Torah portion, that describes the death of Sarah, that means her death, and Abraham buying a beautiful and very expensive burial spot for her, and him to be buried in, is called the life of Sarah. Why would you call the Torah portion, why would the Torah portion that describes the death and burial of Sarah as the life of Sarah? It must be that death isn't what we think it is. We think, and we're told from the world around us, that death is the end. It's all over. And that's why everyone's crying. It's not what they're crying. They're not crying for the deceased. They're fine. They've moved on to Gan Eden, to Olam HaNeshamot. When we lose loved ones, we're not crying for them. We're crying for us. We don't have these people in our lives. The friends and family that pass on, that die, they're okay. They've gone to a better, holier place. They're able to feel a stronger connection. They don't have the physical klippah, the physical shell, right, that has separated them from others and from God. Their soul is now open and manifest and connect to God directly. It's us, we're crying because we don't have this person in our lives anymore. A void, a vacuum has been created, and we're missing out on this person and their merit and their prayers and their good deeds in our lives. And so when Sarah dies, it's called the life of Sarah, because the life continues. The life continues to the next generation. In her case, the marriage of her son Isaac, to her continuation, her spiritual mission is taken on by her daughter-in-law and her son, Isaac and Rebecca. So that is life. For us, death isn't the end. For you, maybe I'm stating the obvious. But for her, she finished her life. She completed her mission. Her soul separated from her body. Her husband was hesped her. He eulogized. He cried for her. He cried tears for himself. He missed her. Her spiritual deeds were no longer here. And then the next chapter begins. The life of Sarah continues with the next generation. And we see this a lot, by the way. We see this a lot. Dor holech, dor ba. God arranges it. And I've seen this too many times for it to be a coincidence. The great people die and leave us. And then straight away, the next generation comes. I know we eulogize, and we're like, we can't carry on. Who's going to be there for us? Who's going to lead us? God always arranges that there is no gap in between, or if there is, it's very short and very small. One generation goes and you'll find great people die at the same time. We just saw the death on Friday of one of the great leaders of the Haredi world, Rabbi David Feinstein, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein's son, great individual. And then on Shabbat was the passing of Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Zeichat Tzadik Lebracha. Could it be coincidence? They died within one day of each other, Erev Shabbat and Shabbat. And the generations continue. Someone or some people have taken their place. It just must be. And so they fulfilled their mission. They went with great years and days of their lives, and the generations continue. And that's what happened to Sarah. Sarah had 3 miracles that were with her all the time. Listen very carefully, because they're all very interesting. The first miracle, says the Gemara, was that Sarah lit a lamp every Friday for Shabbat, and the light of that lamp, which had enough oil to last for one day, lasted for 1 week. Sounds familiar, right? The oil that should have lasted for 1 day lasted to the next Friday, when she had to relight the light again, and once again, 7 days. the light lasted. She also used to make bread. Her and her husband used to make food together. He cooked and she cooked for the many, many guests. They would bring into them. The home was basically a traveling tent, and they would bring thousands and thousands of people, mostly idol worshippers, under the Kanfei Shechina, under the wings of God's presence. And they would take them away from idol worship and bring them into monotheism, belief in the one true God. Their home was basically like a hotel. Eshel, Abraham, Achila, eating, Shtia, drinking, Levia, and they would escort them when they would leave. And they would fill them with spiritual goodness, and they would leave idol worship. So that was the second thing. She used to make bread, and there was a blessing, says Rashi, from the Midrash and Gemara, that was found in the dough that she would make. Sarah, Queen Sarah, would make this, and it was so holy and special that even a little bit of it would satisfy a vast amount of people. Miraculously. Thirdly, there was a cloud above Sarah's tent. And this cloud was there whenever they pitched their tent. The cloud miraculously appeared. And the cloud, says the Gemara, represented the spiritual presence and protection of God over their tent. By the way, does anyone know where we see the tent of Sarah and Abraham today in 2020? We actually rebuild that tent. We literally rebuild it. And all of you have definitely seen it, or you may have, and here's your clue, stood under it. Anyone know what the tent is? The tent of Abraham and Sarah is the chuppah, the wedding marriage canopy, which I was under a week ago. Not for my marriage, I performed a wedding a week ago. And so we look at the chuppah and we see it's open on all four sides. Why? It represents the future home of this couple, which is a public demonstration of it. Why is it open on all four sides? Which home is open on all four sides? I'll tell you which home. The first ever Jewish home of Abraham and Sarah was open on all four sides, so passing travelers could come in and enjoy the beautiful home that they built together, but also the blessings that they gave could travel out on all four sides as well. That is the spiritual power of Sarah. And so Sarah was blessed with oil that lasted all week, and bread that lasted all week, and the cloud over the tent. That is the great Jewish prophetess Sarah. When she died, the light was extinguished, the blessing in the Isa and the dough disappeared, and the tent did not have a cloud. The cloud flew away and disappeared. And it remained that way for 3 years until the next generation came. And that was Rebecca. Rebecca was chosen, and Isaac married her because in her they saw tremendous spiritual power. And when Rebecca and Isaac were married, they moved into the mother's tent. The light came back, the blessing of the dough came back, and the cloud appeared over the tent. And the light represented the spiritual light of Sarah, which was now being handed back to Rivka, because it was in her merit. Isaac was around, he didn't have it. She merited it. It's the holy and great Jewish women who bring spiritual light into the home. Al titosh Torah timecha, the Torah of your mother. And then the blessing in the bread reappeared again, because it's in the merit of the great Jewish woman that financial blessing is represented by bread, right? The staple food came into the home. And God's protective cloud only reappeared when Rebecca entered into it with her son, Isaac, with Sarah's son, Isaac, because God's protective cloud only comes in the merit of great Jewish women. And redemption comes to the Jewish people, man, woman, and child, in the merit of the great Jewish women. We see that when the Jewish people left Egypt, they only had the merit of leaving Egypt in the merit of the great Jewish women, Nashim Tzidkaniot in Egypt. And it was Esther who saved the physical life of thousands and thousands of Jewish people throughout the world. In her merit did we have. That's why the book that describes the salvation in Purim was not called the Book of Mordechai. It's called Megillat Esther. Just from the time, and it was written by both Mordechai and Esther. But even Mordechai realized it's in her merit that we got this salvation. And so Dor Halech, one generation goes, Dor Ba. If you want to have spirituality and light in your home, it comes in the merit of the Jewish woman. How a husband treats his wife and the spiritual light the Jewish woman invests into her home, into her children, is what's going to keep the spiritual light going from week to week. And notice something very interesting. The light didn't just appear by itself. The blessing in the dough didn't just appear by itself. The cloud didn't appear by itself. What do I mean? It didn't just happen. It didn't just happen. Where did the light come from? The light came from a wick that was put in the oil. Where did the oil come from? It came from olives. Who pressed those olives? Abraham and Sarah. Who made the wick and deposited it and made the fire that could light it? Abraham and Sarah. And who made the dough? Sarah did. Right? Mahari ta'aseh ugot, says Abraham. Let's make the bread. I'm going to get the meat for our guests. And who made the cloud appear on top? Sarah. She and her husband pitched the tent. And so the cloud appeared. What am I saying? Great miracles don't just happen. People have to do something. If you want blessing and holiness and spiritual success, just like if you need financial success, there has to be hishtadlut, some effort. So too, miracles don't just happen in and of themselves. There has to be some pu'ulah, some action that is taken. And Sarah did something, a small action. One small action can have incredible, long-lasting effects, not just for your home right now, but into the future. You don't even know. You have no idea the future impact that your small actions are going to have in the future, my friends. That small act, that tear, that parak of Tehillim, that prayer, that one mitzvah, that piece of tzedakah is going to roll forward and have implications and ramifications for generations and generations to come. Thousands, if not hundreds, if not millions of people are going to be impacted by your one act today. It happened from Sarah and traveled to Esther. And that, my friends, is the secret of Sarah's success. She was a woman of action. She had one thing in mind, to create a holy Jewish home, which she brought Isaac up in, and she removed all negative influences, which in her day came in the form of Yishmael, that she told Abraham to remove, right? There's got to be certain boundaries. You can't have everything in your home. You've got to decide who, where, when, and what, who your kids are going to play with, where you're going to get your information from. These are serious decisions that we all need to make. And she created, and she became one of the great Jewish prophetesses. Her level of prophecy, we mentioned, was greater than her husband Abraham. The spiritual power of great Jewish women surpasses that of men. That is clear. That is written in too many books. And from life experience as well, that it must be true. Let's travel in time. Let's go meet Sarah's great-great-great-granddaughter who continued her spiritual mission. Because as Rabbi Akiva told us, it's only in the merit of Sarah's years that Esther was blessed by being in control of 127 provinces that Achashverosh owned. And Sarah had a very, very difficult mission. You know, some people's missions are great and wonderful. Sometimes, however, missions come with great, great challenge and difficulty. And Esther's was that way. We know that the Jewish people had been spread out after the destruction of the temple by the Babylonians. And the Jewish people were spread out through the world, and a vast number of them found themselves in Persia, specifically in the capital of Persia, which was called Great Neck. That's a joke. I'll be here all night. Thank you so much. Enjoy the chicken. No, it was actually called Shushan. And there they were in Shushan. Many of them in Shushan Habira, which was the capital of the capital, which was just like you have a certain area which is founded inside the capital where the power base was. The Jewish people had tremendous power base at that time. And Achashverosh was the leader and controller. He was a tremendous anti-Semite. And he actually brought an individual, Haman, who we know from the Purim story, and gave him tremendous power as well at that time. Achashverosh had a wife who was even worse than him. She used to beat and embarrass and humiliate and strip Jewish women and hurt them, make them work on Shabbat. She got her comeuppance. She ended up dying at the hands of Achashverosh when he was in a drunken state. Every king needs a wife, queen, and he goes traveling and he sends out all of his couriers to go find a woman, and many women volunteer for the position, and many of them actually voluntarily go up and try to give themselves up. Many of them were taken against their will. Esther, it says, V'tilakach was taken. That wasn't her real name. Her real name was Hadassah. The name Esther means hidden, because she had to hide her origins in order to survive this incredibly difficult mission that she found herself in. And she did it. She was taken against her will. Her real name was Hadassah, which means Hadassim, myrtle leaves. Some say because she had a beautiful olive green complexion like myrtle leaves, and some say when she found out she had to marry that Meshugana Achashverosh and deal with this crazy guy Haman, she turned green in fright and remained green for the rest of her life. And yet, she was chosen. There's a lot to tell about the story, and we get closer to Purim, God willing, I'll talk about it. But there's one thing I want to pick up on here, and that is the incredible self-sacrifice that Esther had, willing to fulfill her mission, having to leave her husband, be kidnapped and taken against her will, and physically raped by this individual, Achashverosh, realizing, as a prophetess that she was, that she had an incredible mission to fulfill in order to save the Jewish people, which she did. If we're alive today, make no mistake, is because Esther was willing to give her physical and spiritual life up back then, at the time of Achashverosh and Haman. So that's lesson number one. She learned from her great-great-great-grandmother, Sarah, that in order to have spiritual greatness to save other people, sometimes you have to put yourself into tremendous financial, emotional, spiritual, psychological discomfort. Don't think that Jewish leadership comes with fun and games. Rabbis and great Jewish leaders and Rebbitzins will all, and those who've taken on positions of leadership in Jewish organizations, of which many of my students have, and they'll come to me like, I cannot believe I'm doing this. These people are crazy. That's the way it is. If it was easy, it wouldn't be worth achieving. Okay? Moses complained and almost tried to kill himself, as it were, during his mission. And Joshua went through challenges. And King David did, and King Solomon, all had to do with challenges right through history. Sarah did as well. She gave her life up and her time, effort, and money for spiritual success. And so did Esther, her great-great-granddaughter. One last thing, and we'll finish with this. Sarah achieved her greatness throughout her life, but most of it happened later on in life. How old was Esther in the Purim story? If you were to imagine Esther in your mind, most people imagine that she's a young and beautiful woman. However, that's not the truth. Mam Loez, one of the commentators, tell us that she was maybe in her 40s, 50s, even 60s or 70s. Greatness sometimes is earned, achieved, but sometimes it's thrust upon us. And for us, it doesn't always come when we're young. Sometimes the greatest spiritual achievements that we have in our lives come near the end of our lives. Just when you think you're about to retire, it all starts up again. Moses was given his mission to save the Jewish people and go to Egypt at the age of 80 years old or something. Esther was in her 60s, 70s, according to some opinion. Sarah achieves her greatness towards the end of her life as well. We look at the old people in society as, they're old, they're grey, they can't move. In Jewish thought, when you're old, that's when your spiritual life, all the years that led up to this point, leads you to this one special, powerful moment, which may come when you're young, but could even come in your old and great age. And so Sarah and Esther both saved the Jewish people as great, holy prophetesses who weren't as young as you think they were. Thank you so much for joining us. Hope you enjoyed it. God willing, the merit of our great Jewish leaders, young and old, we will continue our own spiritual efforts. We'll pick this up, God willing, tomorrow at 12 p.m. I'll be giving a class on the power of courage. Courage and fear will be tomorrow's session at 12 p.m. If not, I'll see you all next week, next Tuesday night. Have an amazing evening and week. Shalom, shalom.